What's up, guys, and welcome back to Moning. If you guys are new here, then what is up? My name is Erica. Heya, how you doing? And if you're into the history of the ancient Greeks and the Romans, maybe you're just into the mythology and maybe you just saw the cover of the Iliad one time in a bookshop and you were like, hell, what is happening? Huh? Well, then this is not only the channel for you, but this is also the playlist for you. You guys are going to want to hit that subscribe button and that bell icon so that you know every single time I post in the future. But as you can see from the title of today's video, we're going to be delving into book 1 of the Iliad, which I'm super excited about because it means that we have officially started this journey. Now, just so that you guys know, every single video might be a bit long because I do not want to spare the gory details from you guys in regards to what happens in each and every chapter, because I love this book and I want you guys to love this book, and I would hate for you guys to start reading it and not really understand where the plot is going. So at least you have these books to come back to. These videos. Maybe I should write a book, but either way, you have this place basically to come back to make sure that everything you're understanding and you know where the plot is going and you know what just happened and blah, blah. I'm gonna be trying to help you as much as possible. So let's dive into book 1. So the poem does open with Homer evoking a muse to help him tell the story of the Rage of Achilles. Okay, that is literally the first word of the entire thing is rage. So we know that that is the driver of the storyline. Not only that, but it also is going to be the driver of a lot of deaths. He does highlight that to us as well. And evoking a muse to tell you a story, which is exactly what Homer does. He literally asks the muse, like that's what you do at the beginning of ancient poetry. You ask a muse to help you tell the story. And that is fairly normal. That is exactly where the whole phrase comes from nowadays, by the way, when, you know, like you write a song, I don't know, and you say this person was the muse, you know, like that whole like romantic type of language, that comes from this tradition of, well, they thought they were literally evoking a muse, okay? So they're like literally praying to one of the 9 muses and they're like, help me, because I need your power to help me tell this super long story. So if I could summarize this book right before we get into it into one sentence, it would probably be that Achilles gets mad because Agamemnon is literally a child. Like, it's shocking when you're even reading it, like understanding that these are 2 grown men having this conversation and you're just like, oh my god, why? Just stop. So the rage specifically spurs on this argument between Agamemnon and Achilles, and Homer does tell us that it's actually Apollo that does also infuse a lot of anger in both of them, and Apollo is another one of the driving reasons. Now, the reason why Apollo is one of the driving reasons is because this argument breaks out because Agamemnon has kept a priestess of Apollo in his tent. So a little bit of context for that is that prior to the Iliad, we don't actually get this in the writing, but they had sacked a town, and one of the war prizes, which was always a woman, a really hot woman normally, one of the war prizes was a priestess of Apollo called Briseis. Now, this prize was given to Agamemnon. However, pretty much quickly after that, Briseis, her dad, they're not really original with names as you can tell. So Briseis comes to the Greek camps and he begs Agamemnon to give her back. And he's like, look, it's not only dishonoring the god, it's also dishonoring me. I'll give you all this gold and all these great things if I can have my daughter back, like, please. And Agamemnon basically tells him to fuck off. And he's like, if I see you in these parts again, there's gonna be trouble. And you're just like, oh god, this is not gonna go well. So Briseis, her dad, right, the priestess's dad, this is now part of the action that we're reading, he leaves and he decides to pray to Apollo. And he says, look, great Apollo, great God, I'm your priest, remember me? And if you ever respected me as your priest, and if you ever loved me as your priest, then you will make the Greeks punish for their dishonor towards me. Now, Apollo hears this, right? Apollo is on Olympus, and he hears this prayer, and he has this little pacing moment on Olympus where he's like, God, I'm so mad, how am I gonna make the Greeks die and punish and peril and blah, blah. And he decides, rightfully so, because most people don't know that he is the god of also medicine and disease. So he decides that he's going to rain a plague down on the Greeks, right? That is his brilliant plan that he has. So he gets his little bow and arrow, and I just want to clarify that this is not literal rain, like, of actual arrows. I think people read it thinking that there are legitimate arrows like firing down on the Greek camp now when Apollo decides to throw this plague on them. It's not literal. For Apollo it is, but for humans it's just people start dying, right? Okay, so don't think that they're like hiding in their huts because Apollo is literally sending arrows down on them. But he does fire these arrows of plagues down to the Greek camp. And he begins by targeting the animals. So he targets like the mules and the dogs, and all those things start dying. And people in the camp start noticing and they're like, weirdness. And then he starts firing at the people. So then, you know, people start getting sick, people start falling, people start dying. And that's when basically everybody's like, we have definitely angered someone. There's some god that is not happy with us. So on day 10, this happens, by the way, for 9 days. So day 10, finally, Achilles has had enough. Achilles is like, this is ridiculous. I have no doubt what has caused this. And so he calls a meeting of all the Greeks. Basically, all the Greek warriors have to come to this meeting that he's called. Now, technically, here's a note that Hera is the one, like the goddess Hera, she technically is the one that infused Achilles with the idea to call said meeting, because she was also like, this is getting out of hand and they can't all die in their camps. We still need a war. So she technically has Achilles do it. But either way, Achilles calls this meeting. So Achilles speaks in front of the entire army, and he starts off by being like, look, boys, clearly we've angered a god. This is not good. We're all dying on the battlefield. We're dying in the camps. There is nowhere that is safe for us. It is probably better if we just go home at this rate. But first of all, we should probably ask a seer, because that was fairly normal in those times to have a seer just like near you. He says we should probably ask a seer what is going on to see if we can right any wrongs, because I'm pretty sure we angered Apollo. He was like, I'm like 90% sure that's what we've done. If we haven't, we should dip out. But we should let's just ask a seer. So there's a seer with them, right? This is a very normal trope, again, that they all have a seer, somebody who can like read all these signs, these like godly signs and all this sort of shebang. That's what a seer is, right? So they have this one called Calchas, who's been with them since like day one. We have other surrounding mythology, including Calchas as well. So he's very famous. Calchas stands up. He's like, oh, I'm the seer. Wait, this is now my time to shine. He stands up and he says, thanks, Achilles. Cheers for prompting me to get up and say something. That's like really chill of you. But I need you to promise me something, because I'm about to say some that's going to make Agamemnon pissed as hell, and I'm terrified of him. So I need you to promise that if he stands up and is about to attack me, then you have to protect me. And Achilles is like, okay, just say what the fuck you have to say. So Calchas gives his great reading where he says, yeah, so we definitely angered Apollo. It's because Agamemnon has Chryseis and he has to give Chryseis back. Not only does he have to give Chryseis back to her father, but he also, all of us, have to do a hecatomb, which for those of you who don't know is the sacrifice of 100 cattle. Like, it's massive. So he's like, yeah, we also have to sacrifice a hecatomb to say that we're really sorry. And it's all because Agamemnon has Chryseis. And literally in that moment, he sits down. He like does not want to be in anybody's line of vision. He's like, no, please don't involve me. And this is definitely the best move, because Agamemnon gets up and he's pissed. Like, Agamemnon is so mad at what Calchas has just said. And literally he stands up and he just points at him and he goes, you, sir, have never told me anything that I want to hear. And that, for those of you who don't know, is also a reference to previous mythology. It's actually really funny. It's very dark, but it is a kind of a comical moment that he's just like, you are the seer of evil. Like literally says that to him. He also, in this speech, moves on from slating Calchas to then slating his own wife who's back home, which is always wild to me that he says this random throwaway line being like, I like Chryseis way better than my wife Clytemnestra, and I would much rather have Chryseis as my wife than Clytemnestra, so I'm not gonna give her away. And you're like, why would you just stand there and say that like Clytemnestra was compared to this random priestess? That's just so unfair to Clytemnestra. And also, by the way, she does pop up in later mythology, so people would have known her name even though it is just a throwaway line. After he slates not only Clytemnestra but then like the rest of the Greeks as well, he then does start opening up to the idea of giving Chryseis back. He does start saying, okay, well, it's probable that I could do this, but if I do give Chryseis back, then I need you guys to promise that you're going to replace Chryseis immediately with another war prize, because he doesn't want to be prizeless. Like, this was a whole like shot against his manlyhood in that time. So he was like, no, I need to have a prize. You guys need to give me another prize. Naturally, Achilles stands up and he's like, what prize do you think we have on offer to replace Chryseis with? Like, excuse me, we don't have one right now. That's not reasonable. However, he's like, I'm willing to compromise. And in fact, we will promise to give you a prize that is about 3-4 times better than Chryseis once we sack Troy. So if you can wait until then, you will get a prize then. But for now, you'll have to be prizeless, because we have to give Chryseis back because people are dying. You're the reason why people are dying. Give her back. We will give you a prize later. Which Agamemnon's like not happy about, because Agamemnon thinks that Achilles is just trying to cheat him out of having a prize. Which, why would he do that? What would he have to from doing that? It bothers me every single time I read it. So Agamemnon is like, absolutely not. If you don't have a prize to replace Chryseis with, then I'm either going to steal your prize, Odysseus's prize, Ajax's prize. I think that's it, actually. I said that as if I was going to say somebody else, but I'm like 90% sure it's only those three. So he's like, I'm going to steal one of your prizes. And obviously Odysseus and Ajax, they're sitting down and they're like, what the f have we done? There's like a constant back and forth between the two of them. And eventually he does say, okay, I'm going to give Chryseis back. That's fine. And I'm going to have Odysseus get on the boat with her, bring a bunch of men as well, so that they can all make sure that the hecatomb gets there, the sacrifice takes place, and all that sort of shebang. So he's agreed, right? He has agreed to giving Chryseis back. But he doesn't do it in a nice way, because he just said that in order to give Chryseis back, he's going to steal somebody else's prize, which obviously still makes Achilles mad, because Achilles is raging that he's on that list. And he's like, absolutely not. In starting this speech, Achilles gives a really interesting point of view, where he actually says that Agamemnon needs to get off his high horse because he thinks that everybody is there because they all have a common interest of hating Trojans. And Achilles says, literally, none of us hate the Trojans, only you hate the Trojans. The Trojans have never done anything bad to us. And he uses himself as an example. He says they've never invaded where I am. They've never said anything bad about me. They've never hurt any of my people. I have zero issues with the Trojans, and I'm just here because we made an oath 1,005 years ago. Well, his dad technically made an oath, but still. So he's like, we're just here because of the oath. We don't actually like you, and we don't actually care or hate them. So you need to remember that when you're trying to order us around and have a little bit more respect. He also says that the fact that Agamemnon is threatening to take his prize is unbelievably disrespectful, given that whole thing that I just said as well, because the Greeks honored Achilles with his prize. That was a really big deal, that Briseis was given to him. And Achilles highlights that it's because he's always at the front of battle. He's like, I'm doing your dirty work, basically, because I'm the best fighter. And he's like, don't forget that actually Briseis was given to me because I have done an amazing job, and you're willing to dishonor me just to make sure that you kind of feel better about yourself, and you're going to dishonor my work that I've been doing for Menelaus, your brother, because that's the only reason why he's there. And then he ends by literally threatening to go home, and he's like, why would I stay here if I'm going to be dishonored like this, and if you're even going to talk to me like this, let alone if you actually act on this. But just the fact that you're talking to me like this, I should really just go home right now, take my honor, take my men, where I'm really just cutting my losses and going home. And so Agamemnon literally is a fucking child in this moment, and this is genuinely what gets so many people worked up when they read this scene. Because Agamemnon stands up and goes, fine, go home. I'm not going to make you stay here. There's loads of people who want to fight for me, and loads of people who want to see me have this great honor. You suck anyways. You only have this great power in battle because you're the son of a god and you didn't actually earn any of your strength. So leave. I don't even care. But just for that, I am taking Briseis. And literally you're reading this and you're just like, what the f***? Like, how childish do you have to be to give a speech like that? And not only that, but you're giving it to Achilles, who's also a notorious hothead. And so he, in this moment, gets really mad. Like, Achilles cannot even believe that he's being yelled at this way in front of all of his men. And he's not being spoken to respectfully. And he's going to have his war prize taken away. And so it's described that literally he thinks that he's going to kill Agamemnon in this moment. Like, he reaches for his weapon. And Hera and Athena, who are on Olympus, and they're watching this, Hera basically hits Athena and is like, oh no, you have to go and stop this. Like, you can't die like right now. We can't have Achilles do this. So Athena goes down in a second. She shrouds herself in mist, so only Achilles can see her. And Achilles turns around. He is startled that Athena is there. But he's like, please tell me that you're here to just see how ridiculous Agamemnon is being. He's being a child. I'm over it. Can you not see this? And Athena just goes, chill, my guy. Simmer. You're going to have much greater honors than Agamemnon will. Don't you worry. Just simmer down. Put your hand off your little weapon. Step back. And so Achilles obeys her. Kind of. So he does step back. He's not necessarily less aggressive. And instead what he says is he just yells insults at Agamemnon. He basically calls him a sack of wine, which is like the only thing in the movie Troy that they got right, mind you. Achilles also calls him a dog face or like dog eyes. It's one or the other. He basically says he looks like a dog, which none of those things are very flattering in the ancient world. They're not very flattering now even. I don't think I would like it if somebody said that I look like a sack of wine. I'd be like, what does that mean? This is also the famous moment where Achilles says that he will not fight. He says that because of the dishonor, he's not going to go into battle. He's not going to protect them. And the Greeks and Agamemnon will rue the day that they dishonored him in this way. Basically, he doesn't literally say that, but that's kind of how I read it. And he says that the Greeks are going to be crawling back to his tent the second that they realize that he's the only worthy contender of Hector, because Hector's really scary Trojan who can kill all of them. And when that starts happening, they're going to crawl back to Achilles and he's going to be like, I told you so. And at the moment, by the way, he's holding a scepter when he speaks, because it's right now that he like throws it on the ground like a child, and then he sits down and he's like, As Achilles sits, Nestor rises. So Nestor's another character. He is noted as Old Man Nestor. That's how old Nestor is, that literally his epithet is Old Man Nestor. So he stands up. He's very important to the rest of the text, mind you. He stands up and he says, all right, guys, I need everybody to calm down. You guys aren't that great. Like, literally, he says, I've worked with better heroes than both of you combined, and lists off all of these really famous heroes. One of them is Thetis, which is unfortunate. But he does list off all these great heroes. He's like, all of them are much better than you, and they all listen to my counsel. They listen to my opinion. So now, sit the fuck fuck down and listen to what I have to say. And basically Nestor looks at Agamemnon and he's like, you should not be taking Achilles' prize because we did all give him the prize based on the incredible work that he's done in battle. So don't do that. And then Nestor turns to Achilles and he says, and you have some respect for your freaking superior because Agamemnon's still the overall king. He still led us into battle. You need to have way more respect for him. And then Nestor himself sits down. That's what he does. As Nestor sits down, Agamemnon feels like it's now his time to shine, to stand up again, which I don't know why he would feel this way. And genuinely, when you're reading it, you're like, sit back down, stop it, sit down. And he won't, obviously, because he's a character and he's going to do whatever the hell he wants to and whatever hell Homer wants him to, even though you are crying at the pages at this point. So Agamemnon stands up and he starts off nice, right? He starts off well. He says, thank you, Nestor, for getting up and for saying your piece. We do appreciate it. It's wonderful that we have this old man, whatever, all of this like really nice stuff. And then he decides to yell at Achilles in front of everybody again and says, and you need to remember that just because you're son of a god doesn't mean that you can be rude, which obviously is just going to anger him again, obviously. So Achilles, very predictably, stands up and says, don't ever tell me what to do again. Don't ever speak to me again. You can come and get Briseis like you have continuously said you're going to. Come take my war prize. I won't argue with you then. But if you so much as breathe on anything else that I own, I will kill you. And then he leaves. Like literally, Achilles just walks out and he walks out with Patroclus, who is his like best friend. Walks out with him, the assembly disperses, and Agamemnon makes Odysseus, he's going to get on the boat with Chryseis to bring Chryseis back to her father. So he puts, all the cattle on the boat and everything, and then they sail off. After this, Agamemnon is still mad, so he doesn't want to go and see Achilles in his tent to go and pick up Briseis. I think also he's probably a little bit scared. Like, who wouldn't be? Achilles is absolutely terrifying. So instead, he sends his two minions called Talthybius, yes, that is his name. Had to spell it in my head. So he sends Talthybius and Eurybates over to the tent instead. And Homer describes them as going so reluctantly to Achilles' tent because they're so scared of him. And so they end up going and they're standing outside and Achilles walks out to meet them. And they're so scared that they won't say anything to him. So Achilles, there's this really awkward moment where they're just staring at each other. And then Achilles is like, I don't blame you, right? Like you guys didn't do anything to me. You're just carrying out orders from Agamemnon. So I'll give you Briseis, like don't worry. And both of them are sort of like, oh, thank God. Patroclus brings out Briseis, gives Briseis to the two guys, and even Briseis is described as leaving unwillingly. Like she actually really wanted to be in Achilles' tent, considering the situation that she's in. She actually wanted to be in Achilles' tent, so she leaves and she's very unwilling, but she does go to Agamemnon's tent. Now Achilles in this moment does what Achilles is famous for and what he does best, and he goes down to the beach and he cries to his mother. Literally goes down to the beach and starts wailing about how unfair life is. And he's like, I'm destined to have such a short life and I have to spend it in pain. It's absolutely ridiculous when you read this because he's a grown man. We need to remember he's a grown man, right? This man has a child somewhere in the world. Like, what? But he's crying on the beach, crying about how unfair everything is. And Thetis, who is his mother, who's a sea goddess, she hears him. And so she's under the water, she hears him wailing, and she comes up to the surface and gives him a cuddle. And she's like, oh, my baby, what's wrong? Tell me why you're crying. Even though she just heard him, which this part never makes any sense to me, because she had to hear him in order to come up to the surface. So I don't know why she then doesn't know why he's crying and he has to repeat everything, because he does. He repeats his whole argument of being like, I'm destined to have a very short life and yet I'm being disrespected by Agamemnon and all this kind of shebang and I don't want to do this anymore. And so you have to read it all again. That's what I'm trying to say. You read the same thing twice. But then he asks Thetis, his mother, for a favor. And he says, look, I need you to help me and I need you to go to Olympus and to ask Zeus to help me get my honor back and my glory back. So I need you to tell him to help the Trojans so that way the Greeks will realize how great of a warrior I am and come crawling back to me. So he basically has asked his mother to go and ask Zeus to basically be on the other team's side so that his team start losing so that they realize that he's a great warrior. That's fucked up. Like, genuinely, every time I read that, I get mad at him again and again and again because I just think it's the most childish way of handling the situation. And what's worse is that Thetis goes, yeah, sure, I'll do that. No problem. Doesn't try to school him or mother him or anything like that. Isn't like, by the way, as your mum, it's like my job to tell you when you're being unreasonable and this is totally unreasonable. No. Thetis says that she feels really bad because she feels bad for birthing him, basically, because the prophecy was there before he was born. The prophecy of his very short but very glorifying life. That's now a word. That's now a phrase. So she says she feels really bad about that. And so she's willing to do whatever it is to make him feel better in his short life and to make him feel a little bit loved and a little bit good. But, however, she can't go and talk to Zeus right now because Zeus is at dinner. So she'll have to wait until after dinner to go and talk to Zeus. And Achilles is like, that's fine as long as you talk to him eventually. And you're like, what? Whilst we're waiting for dinner to be over on Olympus, right? We have to wait for that to happen. Then the action cuts to Odysseus, who has now made it to Chryses so that he can drop off Chryses' daughter, Chryseis. So he makes it there, and there's a whole description of what a sacrifice would have been like. That's how we get a lot of, literature like this is how we understand a lot of those things from the ancient world. So this is kind of how we understand sacrifices, because they go into detail about how that would have happened, which is really cool. And this happens through the entire day and into the night. So the men stay overnight where Chryses lives, and then they leave in the morning. And then it literally is described as like Odysseus leaves them all back, like leads them all back to where they were saying, I think I said leaves initially, but he leads them all back. And then when they get off the boat, they all just like disperse to their individual friendship groups as if they were never friends to begin with, which like is such a cliquey thing to do. It's such like a teen drama thing to do when like all of these like misfits end up being friends, and then they have to like go back to their regular lives, but like they're still kind of friends on the inside. That's the vibe of this line, mind you. That's exactly what Homer describes, and you're like, why? But regardless, we're now into the next day, and Achilles is still mad, right? But he's described as being very like hungry for war. He really wants to go back into battle, but he's so stubborn. It's only been a day, mind you, but he's so stubborn for the one day that he's like, I made a whole thing yesterday, so I'm not going back into war. But we know that he really, really wants to. So we cut to Thetis, who is now going up to Olympus to talk to Zeus. So she gets up to Olympus. Zeus is by himself in this room, and she's described as like putting one hand on his knee and one hand under his chin to ask him this favor, which is like saucy as Thetis. And she asks him to aid the Trojans, and he doesn't reply. I think he doesn't reply because he's so overwhelmed that a hot girl is probably this far away from his face and she's physically touching him, so he doesn't reply. So she moves the hand from beneath his chin down to his other knee, and she's like, So, are you going to help Achilles by making the Trojans win? Obviously, Zeus then has to reply, and he says, okay, here's the deal. You're putting me in a really difficult situation with my wife, because Hera is on the side of the Greeks. And apparently for the first 9 years of the war, Zeus was aiding the Trojans because he loves the Trojans, and Hera was getting on his case. And Hera was constantly like, why aren't you team us? Like, we have to be a team, we're married. And so Zeus started then showing favor towards the Greeks. So Thetis is putting him in a really awkward position, and he does say that to her. He says, it's not fair that you're putting me in this position. However, I understand what you're saying, and I am going to help Achilles. I am going to go and help the Trojans. So don't worry, but I need you to leave like right now because I'm about to go and see Hera, and I need you to not even be on Olympus. And so Thetis is like, whatever, I'm taking that as a yes, and I'm gonna go. And so she leaves, and she's pretty happy with herself, as you should be. Now Zeus has called a meeting on Olympus, right? So in this moment, he has to walk into his meeting, and he walks in, everybody stands up, all the other Olympian gods stand up, and he goes to sit by Hera, and literally from the moment that he enters the room, Hera can tell that has hit the fan. She knows that something's up. So Zeus sits down next to her, and she just goes, what kind of deals have you been making? She's like, I know that you've been making a deal. Can smell it coming off you. When you make deals, why do you always make it when I'm not in the room? Why don't you just talk to me like a normal person? That's what married couples do. If you want to go and do something like that, holler at me first. I don't know why that's so tough for you. Zeus then replies saying, just because we're married, I don't know why that means that you think you're going to know everything about my life. If I want you to know something, I'll let you know. But if not, you're not going to know. That's how this works. Like, literally, that's what he says to her. And he ends it in the worst way a married man can, where he says, stop probing at my life. And Hera obviously hears this, and she's like, excuse me, I wasn't probing you. I just know because I can smell Thetis coming off you that you've made a deal with Thetis. And I'm pretty sure that the deal with Thetis is that you're going to help the Trojans because Thetis is mad that the Greeks have disrespected Achilles, and that's the only way that I can viably see that they're going to make this arrangement to make Achilles seem better. So Hera is bang on. She's bang on the money about what's going on. And obviously Zeus can't tell her, actually, you're right, that's exactly what I just did. So instead, he says the most boy response he could have. Like, literally, even in modern terms, this is a boy response. Essentially, what he says to her is, believe whatever you want to believe. That's fine if you believe that I've made a deal with Thetis. If that's what you want to believe, then that's what you're going to believe. Then believe that. Like, literally, you're reading it and you're just like, are you Like, that's your argument, Zeus? Really? That's it? That's as strong as it comes? But then he does follow it up by saying, if you keep probing at my life like this, if you keep doing things like this, especially in front of the other Olympians, you're just gonna keep pushing me away. Which is a point that kind of I get. But he's like, stop doing that. You're gonna push me further and further away. I'm not gonna be more loving towards you. I'm gonna be colder towards you. And he ends it very problematically. He says, also, I'm getting really mad right now, and if I decide to hit you, none of the other gods are gonna come to your aid. So I think that you should probably pipe down from your chair. And you're like, oh, jeez. You should, like, what? And it's really sad because Hera gets really scared in this moment, and she's described as recoiling into her chair because she doesn't even want to say anything back, even though she's right. Remember, she's right about what just happened with Thetis. So it is actually really kind of a sad moment. And instead of just leaving Hera hanging, we actually get her son Hephaestus, who stands up, and he says to the entire room of Olympians and to Hera, he says, you know, like, this is my mother, I love her, and I want her to be safe. And you know that I would do anything for you. I do wish that you were nicer to my dad, aka Zeus, which is problematic. And you're just like, I'm gonna ignore that line, Hephaestus, because what you're doing is actually really nice. But he does say that if Zeus were to attack Hera, he also couldn't come to her aid. And he highlights that, saying, I want you to be safe, but I cannot come to your aid because Zeus is way more powerful than me. He's also my dad. I remember that one time that I did come to your aid and he threw me off Olympus and I landed on Lemnos, and that's why my legs are now lame. And you're like, oh, okay. There are varying versions of that myth though, mind you, that sometimes it's Hera who throws Hephaestus, but in this particular instance, it was Zeus, and it works for this argument. So Hera though is described as sitting in her chair, and she does smile at Hephaestus for doing this. Whether she smiles at the memory, I'm not really sure, or she's smiling at the fact that Hephaestus is standing up for her. Again, unsure. She's just described as smiling, and she hands Hephaestus a goblet of wine. And so Hephaestus turns around, he takes a drink, and then he goes to fill up everybody else's wine glasses with a jug. But all the other gods start laughing at him because I just told you that he's lame. If you don't know that like Hephaestus's legs like don't properly work. So he is literally lame. That's how he's described. And so he's shuffling about and the gods are laughing at him. It's awful. And then they all finish the feast and all this sort of shebang. They all go home. They go home to the homes that Hephaestus built for them. So they have a lot of nerve laughing at him on Olympus, yet they're going to a home that they only have because of him. Rude. And then the last line of this whole book is that Hera and Zeus end up going to bed together and neither of them are mad. And yeah, that's the end of the book. So I know it's a little bit longer than normal. All the episodes will kind of be this long. Once again, I am not sparing you any of the gory details because I do love the Iliad. I hope that you enjoyed book one. It is not an exact reading, mind you. I am not quoting anything. I'm really just talking off the top of my head about what happens in the book. So there is a lot of detail that is missing. I don't have any online sources for this. I do just suggest that you go and you buy your own copy. I will always be linking different versions in the description below so that you guys can find them and hopefully enjoy it as much as I do. So thank you guys so much for watching this video, and we'll be seeing you next time with book 2 here on Moaning. So we'll see you then.